Welcome back to Everyday English Pod, everybody. Today we're diving into a topic that, well, kind of touches everything we do in the business world, right? How we communicate. I mean, it's not just about the words themselves, is it?
It really isn't. It's about building those connections, getting your point across clearly, but also, really grasping what the other person is trying to tell you. It's a two-way street.
Exactly. And, we've been looking at some really fascinating discussions and expert insights on just this. So today, let's break down some of the key takeaway stuff you can actually use right now to communicate better at work.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Building those strong relationships in the workplace. We all know clear communication is important. But how crucial is it really in avoiding those misunderstandings that can just derail everything?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. I'd say it's probably the root cause of so many workplace issues. I mean, think about it. Project delays, conflicts between people, even just frustration and inefficiency. So often, it all boils down to, a lack of clear communication from the get-go. When everyone is crystal clear on the goals, their roles, all those little nuances, that's when you have a solid base for a good working relationship.
Right. And that naturally brings us to active listening. It's something we hear a lot about, but I think many people assume it's just about, waiting patiently for your turn to speak.
Yeah, it's so much more than that. Active listening means being totally present with the other person, I mean. You really focus on what they're saying, both the words themselves and what they might be implying or feeling. And that means, quieting those little voices in your own head, not planning your response while they're still talking.
That's tough, though, isn't it?
It is. But it's key. And sometimes what's not said is just as revealing as what is.
That's interesting. And, something we often don't pay enough attention to is body language. We tend to think it's all about the words, but our bodies are constantly sending signals, aren't they?
All the time. It's fascinating how much we communicate without even realizing it. Eye contact, for instance, shows you're engaged, that you respect the other person. Even a nod can indicate that you're following along. But these nonverbal cues can either, support your message or completely contradict it. It's like two conversations happening at the same time.
Okay, so we're building these relationships. Now, at some point, we've got to give and receive feedback, which honestly can feel a bit like navigating a minefield. What are some, golden rules for making feedback constructive and actually helpful?
One thing that kept coming up in the discussions we looked at was being specific. Instead of just a general good job, pinpoint exactly what was effective and why. Same thing when you're addressing areas for improvement. Focus on, observable behaviors or actions and explain the impact they have. Combining that positive reinforcement with clear, actionable suggestions is so much more powerful than just highlighting flaws.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, receiving feedback, man, that can be tough, even when you know the person has good intentions. How do we get better at taking it in?
It's all about mindset. If you can see feedback as a chance to grow rather than a personal attack, that's huge. Even if it's not delivered in the best way, try to extract the valuable nugget. It's a chance to see yourself and your work from a different angle.
That makes sense. Another thing that really struck me was the power of tone. I mean, we spend so much time crafting the perfect wording, but how much does tone of voice or even the tone of an email actually affect how the message lands?
Tone is massive. It can completely change the meaning of what you're saying. A warm, respectful tone, whether you're speaking or writing, builds that trust and rapport. But a tone that comes across as, say, curt or dismissive, that can damage relationships in a flash, even if your words are neutral. Especially in emails, without those vocal cues and facial expressions, things can get misinterpreted so easily.
No doubt about that. And we all have different personalities, and work throws so many different situations at us, which leads to adapting our communication style. What works with one person or in one context might totally bomb in another, right?
Absolutely. One size fits all. No way. It's about tailoring your communication. Consider their background, how much they already know, their preferred way of taking in information. That's how you make your message resonate.
And sometimes you need to be direct, just get to the point, and other times you got to be more diplomatic. How do you find that balance?
It's all about being attuned to the specific situation and the people involved. Knowing when to be assertive and when to take a more collaborative approach, that's a real skill.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't forget about cultural differences in how people communicate.
Right. Huge point. So what are some core principles to keep in mind when you're communicating across cultures?
Patience is key. And being genuinely open to different communication norms. What's considered direct in one culture could be totally rude in another. Clarity is crucial too. So avoiding jargon, slang, anything that might not translate well. It's about being mindful and respectful of those differences.
Makes sense. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about getting things done, making sure our communication is clear in a business context. Just how important is it to be clear and unambiguous to keep projects moving smoothly and avoid those costly mistakes?
It's not just important, it's essential. Ambiguity, that's the enemy of efficiency. If roles, responsibilities, and expectations aren't crystal clear, you're almost guaranteed to run into problems. Errors, delays, frustration. It's a recipe for disaster. Being precise with your language and making sure everyone is on the same page. That's non-negotiable if you want a project to succeed.
Especially when you're dealing with clients, right? The stakes are even higher. You've got to be clear and avoid all that technical jargon that might leave them feeling lost.
Exactly. Clients need to understand what you bring to the table, and they need to feel confident in your expertise. So break down those complex concepts.
Yep.
Skip the insider language. It builds trust when they feel like you're speaking their language, focusing on their needs, not just showing off how much you know.
The discussions we looked at also highlighted how powerful visual aids can be. A good chart or diagram, it can often convey a complex idea so much better than paragraphs of text. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Visuals are amazing for making abstract information concrete, easier to grasp. Plus, they can make presentations more engaging and help people remember the information better. It's like giving the brain another way to understand.
Right. But even when we try our best to be clear, misunderstandings still happen. So what are some strategies for, dealing with those inevitable moments when things get muddled?
Take a breath.
Yeah.
Pause. Then try rephrasing what you're saying using different words. Sometimes that's all it takes. Asking clarifying questions is helpful too. It helps you figure out exactly where the miscommunication happened. And don't be afraid to use examples to illustrate your point. It can really solidify understanding.
What about after a meeting, particularly one where a lot was discussed and decisions were made? How do you make sure everyone walks away with the key takeaways and knows what to do next?
Following up with an email summarizing the main points is crucial. Outlining the key decisions, action items, who's responsible for what, and by when. It gives everyone a written record, reinforces understanding, and encourages accountability.
Okay, let's talk about those conversations we all dread, the difficult ones. They're unavoidable in work, right? So what's the best mindset and approach for going into them?
Going in calm and focused on finding solutions is essential. Right from the start, set a respectful and open tone. The goal is to reach a solution that works for everyone, not to win an argument.
What about when emotions start running high? How do you keep the respect there, prevent the conversation from going off the rails?
Active listening is crucial in these situations. When people feel genuinely heard and understood, they're more likely to stay respectful, even if they strongly disagree. Even if you don't share their perspective, acknowledging it can de-escalate things before they get out of control.
Something we saw emphasized a lot was using I statements. Why are those so helpful in tough conversations?
I statements, like saying, I feel concerned when, instead of you always. They help you express your feelings and observations without sounding like you're blaming the other person. This keeps the focus on the problem you're trying to solve and makes people less defensive, so you're more likely to have a productive conversation.
And being able to manage our own emotions, especially when things get heated, that's got to be so important, right?
Absolutely. Staying calm and composed, not letting your emotions dictate how you respond, that's how you stay professional and focused on finding a solution.
Okay, but what if the other person starts getting defensive or upset? What do you do then?
First, stay calm yourself. That's key. Acknowledge their feelings. You could say something like, I see you're feeling frustrated. Then gently guide the conversation back to the facts and the solutions you're trying to explore. Empathy is huge here. It helps de-escalate tension and shows you understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with them.
Let's delve into that a little deeper. The power of empathy. It's more than just being nice, isn't it? It feels like a core communication skill.
It is. Empathy is about truly understanding and sharing the feelings of another person, putting yourself in their shoes, basically. And it leads to stronger connections, fosters mutual understanding, and creates a more collaborative environment, whether you're working together on a project or trying to navigate a disagreement.
How about in a negotiation? When there are competing interests at play, how does empathy fit in there?
When you approach a negotiation with empathy, you're not just focused on their stated position, but you're trying to understand their underlying needs and concerns. And that can lead to creative solutions that benefit both sides, making the whole process less adversarial.
Does leading with empathy make a difference when you're giving feedback?
Absolutely. When you give feedback with empathy, you're acknowledging the other person's effort and perspective, even when pointing out areas for improvement. It makes people feel supported, not just criticized, which makes them more receptive to what you're saying and more likely to actually make changes.
But there's got to be a balance, right? You still need to be assertive when the situation calls for it.
Definitely. You can be clear and direct while still being compassionate and understanding. The message can be firm, but the delivery should respect the other person's feelings and dignity. Think of it as being both strong and kind.
Now, let's talk about those barriers to communication, because even with the best intentions, things can get in the way. What are some common roadblocks we should be aware of?
Lots of things can get in the way. Differences in language, cultural nuances, even the technology we rely on. Just recognizing these potential barriers is a good first step toward overcoming them.
So if you're dealing with a language barrier, what are some practical tips for making sure your message gets through?
Keeping your language simple is key. Avoid complex sentences, idioms, anything that might not translate well. Speak clearly at a moderate pace. Visuals can be a huge help too, bridging those language gaps.
And when communicating across cultures, it sounds like doing your homework beforehand, being sensitive to those cultural differences is really important.
It's essential. Take the time to learn about communication norms in different cultures and be ready to adapt your own style. Things like directness, eye contact, even the use of silence can have wildly different interpretations.
Technology is supposed to make things easier, but sometimes it feels like it creates more communication challenges than it solves. How do we make sure we're using it effectively without falling into those traps?
Be intentional with your technology choices. Use email for formal communication or when you need a record of what was said. Instant messaging is great for quick questions and informal check-ins, but avoid it for complex discussions that might get lost in a sea of short messages. For those, video conferencing is invaluable. It allows for those face-to-face interactions even remotely, and you can pick up on nonverbal cues that you miss in audio calls. And then there are collaborative platforms. They can be great for project management and keeping teams on track.
So many options.
Exactly. The key is not to overload people with too many platforms, and be clear about how and when to use each one. Technology should streamline communication, not make it more complicated.
And I think a recurring theme here is the importance of feedback, especially when it comes to breaking down those communication barriers.
For sure. Encouraging open and honest feedback creates a loop of continuous improvement. You catch misunderstandings early on, and it fosters a culture of transparency and understanding, which at the end of the day is what effective communication is all about.
So for someone who really struggles with business communication, what would be your top piece of advice? Where should they start?
Practice active listening. Really focus on understanding what the other person is saying before you even start to think about your response, and be open to feedback. See it as a chance to grow, not as a personal attack. When you truly listen and seek to understand others, clarity in your own communication will naturally follow.
Let's talk about something that's often overlooked, but super important: nonverbal communication. I mean, how much are we really communicating through things like our posture, facial expressions, and tone of voice?
Studies suggest it's a huge part of communication, maybe even more than the words themselves. Think about it. Our posture, our facial expressions, the way we use our hands when we talk, even subtle shifts in our tone of voice. It all conveys information about how we're feeling, what we're really thinking, and how we feel about what we're saying.
So how can we become more aware of our own nonverbal cues and use them to support our message instead of contradicting it?
Good eye contact is key. Use natural, open gestures. Have good posture that's confident but still approachable. It all reinforces what you're saying and creates a positive impression. The key is to be congruent. Make sure your body language matches your words. When there's a mismatch, people tend to believe what they see, not what they hear.
Does nonverbal communication differ across cultures, like with spoken language?
It definitely does.
Yeah.
Something as simple as direct eye contact, which might be seen as attentive in one culture, could be perceived as disrespectful or aggressive in another. Gestures, personal space, even how we interpret facial expressions, it can all vary widely. So cultural awareness is important for nonverbal communication, especially in today's globalized world.
Virtual meetings are so common now. Do you think that affects our ability to read nonverbal cues? It feels like we're missing a lot.
We are. In virtual meetings, we're often only seeing someone from the shoulders up, so we have to pay extra attention to those facial expressions and tone of voice to really understand what they're feeling and how engaged they are. And because we have less nonverbal information, It helps be more explicit with your words to avoid misunderstandings. Encouraging people to turn their cameras on can help too.
What about silence? I think we often feel this urge to fill every pause in a conversation, but what does silence communicate?
Silence can be powerful. It could mean someone's deep in thought, or maybe they disagree but don't want to say it directly. It can also be used strategically to emphasize a point or give the other person a chance to reflect. Getting comfortable with those moments of silence can actually make your conversations richer.
Okay, let's go back to something we touched on before. Effective listening. Really, what does it mean to be an active listener, and what are some things we can do to get better at it?
Active listening is all about being fully present and engaged with the speaker, both mentally and physically. You're focused entirely on their message, blocking out distractions, and genuinely trying to understand their perspective. And you're not interrupting or thinking about what you're going to say before they've finished. Some practical techniques. Maintain good eye contact, nod to show you're following along, ask clarifying questions, and summarize what you've heard to make sure you're on the same page. It's about giving the other person your complete attention.
Those clarifying questions, they seem so simple, but so effective in showing you're not just hearing, but actually engaging with what's being said.
They really are. Thoughtful questions show you're engaged and help clarify any ambiguities. They show the speaker that you value their input and are really making an effort to understand them.
How do you strike that balance between listening carefully and also contributing to the conversation? You don't want to just be passively absorbing information.
Right. The key is to let the speaker fully express themselves without interruption. Then, before you jump in, take a moment to digest what they've said. Then your response can build on their points or maybe ask a clarifying question. It's a back and forth, where good listening lays the groundwork for a meaningful exchange.
It sounds like good listening skills aren't just about understanding, but also about building trust.
Exactly. When people feel truly heard and understood, it creates a connection, a sense of trust. It shows that you value their opinions, which strengthens relationships and creates a more collaborative environment.
What about when someone tends to dominate the conversation and others can't get a word in edgewise? How do you handle that tactfully?
Gently interjecting to create space for others can be helpful. You might say something like, "That's a great point, and I'm curious to hear what others think about this." It's about making the discussion more inclusive, but in a respectful way.
Staying focused and actively listening can be tough in today's work environment. There are distractions everywhere. What are some of the biggest obstacles, and how can we overcome them?
It's tough. We have constant notifications, noise in the background, and our own tendency to multitask or let our minds wander. All of that makes it harder to truly listen. So try to minimize those distractions. Turn off notifications. Find a quiet spot if you can. And mindfulness techniques can help you stay present in the moment. It's a skill you have to practice.
We've talked about how everyone has their preferred way of communicating. How do we get better at recognizing and adapting to these different styles at work?
It starts with observation. Pay attention to how others communicate. Do they prefer short to-the-point summaries, or do they like more detailed explanations? Are they direct and assertive, or more reserved and collaborative? Once you see those patterns, you can adjust your own style accordingly.
And being self-aware of our own communication style is important too, right? We all have our default settings.
Totally. Understand your own tendencies, both your strengths and weaknesses. Then you can be more intentional in how you communicate. And when necessary, you can consciously adjust your style to make sure your message lands the way you intend it to.
What about when you're communicating with people at different levels in the organization? I imagine you wouldn't communicate with a senior executive the same way you would with a brand new team member.
Absolutely. Senior executives, they're often pressed for time. So being concise and focused on the key takeaways is usually best. But with someone who's new to the team, you might need to be more patient, provide more context, give them space to ask questions. It's about tailoring your communication to your audience.
And cultural differences come into play here too, right? What's normal in one culture might be completely different in another.
Absolutely. Be aware of those cultural nuances, how direct people are, the importance of hierarchy, even nonverbal cues. Those things can vary dramatically, and don't hesitate to ask for feedback to make sure your message is coming across as you intend.
It sounds like adapting to different communication styles is an ongoing learning process.
It is. The more you observe, the more you learn, and the more you practice, the better you'll get at navigating those communication differences and building strong relationships.
Team communication is so important for success. What are some ways to encourage effective communication within a team?
The most important thing is to create a space for open and honest dialogue, where everyone feels safe to share their ideas and concerns without being judged. Having clear communication channels and dealing with conflicts quickly and constructively is also important. Regular team meetings can make a huge difference, especially if they have a clear purpose and everyone has a chance to participate.
What about those one-on-one conversations between team members and their managers? Those seem pretty valuable for building trust.
They are. Regular check-ins give people a chance to talk about their progress, deal with any roadblocks, offer support, and just build stronger relationships. That consistent communication builds trust and keeps everyone aligned on goals and expectations. And being transparent within the team, sharing information openly, keeps everyone engaged and motivated.
And team building activities, I know sometimes people see them as optional, but they can actually help break down communication barriers, right?
Definitely. Team building exercises can get people to interact in different ways, which helps build rapport. They get a better understanding of each other's communication styles and preferences, which makes it easier to work together effectively. It also helps to set clear expectations for communication within the team right from the start. It prevents misunderstandings and sets a positive tone.
In big team meetings, how can you make sure your voice is heard? It's easy to get lost in the crowd.
Speak clearly and confidently. Keep your message short and to the point. Use visuals to support your points. That all helps you stand out. Think about timing, too. Know when to contribute and listen actively so you can build on what others are saying. And be prepared. Know what you want to say and how to say it concisely.
Okay, let's talk about communication in the context of problem solving. When a challenge comes up at work, how important is communication in finding a solution?
It's the foundation. Before you can solve any problem, everyone needs to be crystal clear on what the problem actually is. Clear communication helps you define the problem accurately, which prevents misunderstandings and makes sure everyone's working towards the same goal.
And asking the right questions, those probing questions, that's a big part of defining the problem in the first place, isn't it?
Absolutely. Asking good questions helps you get to the root cause of the problem, not just the surface symptoms. And getting the team involved in brainstorming solutions is key. It brings in diverse perspectives and generates a wider range of ideas.
And once you've got some potential solutions, clear communication is still crucial for actually putting those solutions into action, right?
Definitely. Everyone needs to be clear on the action plan, who's doing what, and by when. And regular follow-ups are essential to track progress and deal with any new challenges that pop up. If things don't go as planned, being transparent about those setbacks is really important. It helps maintain trust and allows you to pivot and find new solutions.
So it sounds like the key ingredients for effective communication and problem solving are clarity, openness, and collaboration.
Exactly. When you communicate clearly, honestly, and collaboratively, you can overcome just about any challenge.
Strong professional relationships, they're essential for a successful career. How big a role does communication play in building and maintaining those relationships?
Trust is at the heart of any strong relationship, and communication is how you build and nurture that trust. Being reliable, doing what you say you're going to do, communicating proactively that all matters, and taking the time to actively listen, being responsive to others' needs, and respecting their time, that strengthens those connections even more.
And what about feedback? It's a two-way street, right?
Definitely. Giving constructive feedback regularly shows that you care about the other person's growth, which strengthens the relationship. And being open to receiving feedback shows humility and a willingness to learn and grow. Showing appreciation for your colleagues' hard work and offering support when they need it, that builds a sense of partnership and mutual respect. Ultimately, those strong relationships are built on trust, open communication, and respect.
We've talked about technology quite a bit throughout our conversation. What are some tips for leveraging technology to improve communication at work?
Think about the purpose of your communication. Use email for formal messages, and when you need a written record. For quick questions or informal check-ins, instant messaging is fine. But for complex discussions, stick to video calls or in-person meetings so things don't get lost in translation. And collaborative platforms are great for managing projects and keeping everyone aligned.
Sounds like it's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
It is. And don't overwhelm people with too many platforms. Be clear about how and when to use each tool. The goal is to make communication easier, not more complicated.
And I think it's worth circling back to providing and receiving effective feedback. We encounter that in pretty much every interaction at work. What are the essentials for giving feedback that's actually impactful?
Don't focus on personal criticism. Instead, focus on specific actions and behaviors that the person can change. Make sure to balance constructive criticism with positive reinforcement. Highlight what they're doing well, along with areas where they can improve. And always offer specific, actionable suggestions. Frame it as a way to help them grow and be even more successful.
And how can we get better at receiving feedback even when it's hard to hear?
Go in with an open mind. See it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Try to separate the message from the delivery. Even if the feedback isn't delivered perfectly, there's usually something valuable you can take away from it. Don't be afraid to ask questions to make sure you understand. At the end of the day, feedback, when it's given and received thoughtfully, helps us improve and build stronger relationships.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into business communication. There's so much to learn. It's a continuous journey, but it's so worth it.
I agree. By focusing on active listening, communicating clearly and with empathy, being adaptable, and using technology wisely, you can transform your interactions at work. And when you communicate effectively, everyone benefits.
So as you go about your day, think about these principles. Consider your next interaction at work. How could you apply just one of these insights? Maybe focus on truly listening or being more mindful of your tone. You might be surprised at the difference it makes.
Thanks for listening to Everyday English Pod.